Hey y'all, how's it going? Welcome back. It's Mia, and today we are discussing The Last of Us episode 2. And wasn't this just another strong episode? The critics, they did not lie, and I just want to dive in talking about the episode already and talking about that cold open because I really like the way they're structuring this. You know, like in the game, and if you're new to this series, we are going to be talking about the game quite a bit, but not going into too many spoilers, just enough so that, you know, we're all kind of right down the middle. But anyway, yeah, in the game it is really just the story of Joel and Ellie. So I like that Neil Druckmann, you know, the whole writer creator behind this, is open to expanding his story, because I'm sure there were a lot of ideas that he had, a lot of backstory that he had. And so The Last of Us is a game. It's not a novel. It's not, or was not, a movie or TV show. So I think this was probably the perfect time for him to start to implement more of those theories that he had in his head, or maybe kind of springboard his ideas off of some other people. But I really like how he's been doing this. And so for this week's cold open, you know, before the real show starts, we go into that backstory about Patient Zero, or like technically it's Patient Zero as it can get with this story. And I do like that, you know, they gave us a little breadcrumb at the beginning of the first episode where they're having breakfast and they hear about Jakarta and, you know, something has happened in Indonesia. And so it's just one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, so that's kind of how it started. And then they're like, oh, but we're going to kind of show you what happened in the next episode. So I really like that. And it was a really fascinating yet chilly story, right? You've got this, I guess she was a fungologist or something, right? These authorities come and grab her. They need her to look at a specimen, and she's like kind of in disbelief that this could have grown from a human. And then she kind of sees it for herself with that patient. And oh, number one, I almost forgot, in every HBO show they're probably contractually obligated to have nudity. So if that is a surprise to you, it's not a surprise to me. The only show I think that evaded that pretty well was Westworld season 4, but I think they paid their dues in like seasons 1, 2, and 3, so this time they got to chillax. So Last of Us had to pay their dues to HBO, show a little nudity, but we move on. But more so, the bigger part of that was kind of learning what happened here. And I think from what I had saw, or what I read online, was that there were some fan theories that this is dating back to the original game, that the outbreak could have started somehow with flour. Maybe I'll have to read up on that because it sounds interesting. But lo and behold, as a either confirmation or just kind of nod to that theory, the outbreak did happen in a flour factory. The woman that we saw on the table was working there. She was feral because she got bit, and, you know, all sorts of other things started happening. So we don't really know who Patient Zero was, but we do kind of know who Patient 1 or 2 was, and then how all that spread. And just the fact that when the I guess she was a professor, when she kind of asked, you know, where are the others, and they're like, oh, they just kind of made off, and she's like it's like how that shock sets in, and they're like, is there anything that we can do? And the best thing that she could recommend is like bombing the city. I was like, wow, that's deep. Like, you would never really think like the zombie apocalypse is a catastrophe in and of itself, but kind of having that realization as well that we're just gonna have to, that's it, man. This is the apocalypse right here. I think that's really chilling. And I also think what lends to it is that Craig Mazin, who's also on this, worked on Chernobyl for HBO. So I haven't watched that, but I feel like he also kind of would know from that series how to handle impending doom. And so those two, Neil and Craig, teamed up perfectly, and yeah, boy, was that a chilling opening. So I am wondering if they're going to continue to use this space just, you know, at the very beginning of the episode to tell backstory. I was thinking like maybe this would be a good kind of moment to talk about, or a good space in the episodes to tell Ellie's backstory, just because that seems to be the pattern, at least just with these two episodes. But I still hold that she probably deserves a majority of her own episodes for that backstory. So we probably have some time before we get to that, who knows. But yeah, we'll just see when they get to that part and how they handle it. Quickly though, another thing that I did want to mention before we kind of dive into more of the plot is the fact that I like that we got an outside perspective. And when I say outside, I mean like a global perspective of what is kind of going on during this apocalypse. Mostly because like in Western media, you usually it's just America. So it's like, yeah, America isn't the only place that is infected, but we're really only going to see what's happening in America. Now, I don't watch a lot of zombie media. I probably watch just enough to know, so I'm not the expert here, just seeing what I know. And I think specifically like with The Walking Dead, I've always thought like, if you're gonna have this big show and you're gonna expand it, why not maybe try to do something international? I was like, with The Walking Dead, there's only so many times you can see Alexandria or like the woods or something. So I just, it's like, let's explore something different. So I guess that's why they're doing like Maggie and Negan Take New York. I guess that's going to be different, and that might be pretty cool to see. But otherwise, I'm like, the only really international zombie thing that I know is Train to Busan. That looks really cool. Completely, not Western media whatsoever. But like, again, I said, I'm not really a huge zombie fan. I just think that, hey, wouldn't it be cool to see what else is happening in the rest of the world? Even though we technically don't see the zombie apocalypse break out in Indonesia, it is nice that we still kind of get that background as far as the setting and what happened. All right, so now we can dive a little bit into the plot of what happened in this episode. And mainly what they needed to accomplish now was for Joel and for Tess to deliver Ellie from their quarantine zone all the way over to the state house. It was supposed to be an easy drop-off point, hand her over, and now it's supposed to be that. Now, I mentioned last week, if you watched last week, I was like, given the way that things are going, something is going to change in episode 2 to the point where it diverges just a little bit from the canon, or we'll see how big it diverges from the canon. And so we get answers with that this week. And I was mostly referring to Tommy because in the series, as we saw in episode 1, I kind of explained the differences there. Tommy went missing in the series and Joel wants to go find him. In the game, Tommy is perfectly fine. He's just living out west. And so I didn't really touch too much on how those stories intertwine, but now that we have more information, we can kind of go more into that spoiler territory, which is no longer spoiler, right? They kind of revealed what happened there. So let's go back to the game. And in the game, what happens is they do make it to the state house. They do find that everyone is dead. And also, of course, Tess reveals that she had gotten bitten. And so it's pretty much the end of the line for her. So in the game, as her final instructions, she goes and tells Joel that he needs to take her to go see Tommy. He lives out west. Tommy was a Firefly, so he should know what to do with Ellie. Now, in the series, we end up finding out that the same thing happens, right? The guys are dead. Tess is bitten. She doesn't have much time. And instead, she instructs Joel to take Ellie to Bill and Frank's. And so we know from the episode 3 trailer that they end up going to see Bill, Nick Offerman, in episode 3. So that's not so much of a spoiler there. So basically we kind of see that the divergence that I thought was going to happen really isn't as huge as I was wondering if it was going to be. Basically, instead of her telling them where to go at the very end, like she did in the game, she was like, just go to see Tommy. In the series, she tells them kind of like their next step, go see Bill and Frank, but not necessarily what they should do after, what's their final goal. So we will circle back to what comes next. We'll talk a little bit about what we can expect in episode 3, but as some final things, I just wanted to take some time to talk about just some of the continuing minutia and little gameplay adaptations and things that they borrowed here and there that I think were just really awesome aspects to include in this episode. So for example, there is one part that it was so fun to me to watch that I even tweeted it out, but it was this part where they are in the hotel and they kind of are blocked off. Even there's like a little gap, and so Tess is like the only person, or she volunteers to go up, so she's like, can you give me a hand? And Joel gives her a boost. And if you don't know anything about the gameplay, it's nothing, right? She just said, can you give me a hand? But if you play the game, you're like, oh, that's one of the gameplay mechanics that you end up doing. And it's just one of those things that are so small, one of those if you know things, but it's like, yeah, adding that does not technically impact the story. It doesn't make the story any better. If you take it out, it's not going to do anything to the story for better or for worse. But I do like that they have chosen to just like add in those little details from the game it just makes it all the more enjoyable for the people who know the original material. And it's one of those just kind of like, I guess you could call it like bonus points or, you know, extra credit, just that they include those little things. And even last week, Dunkey made a tweet where he was like, they're using ladders in the series, you know, like most accurate game adaptation ever. And I'm like, I know it's supposed to be a joke, but is he wrong? And then as well, like when they went over to the museum and then all of a sudden they had to start hiding from the clickers. And it's like the clickers were one thing on their own. But what I liked was that it again kind of emulated the gameplay, like having Joel have to crouch and use the environment to kind of stealth and sleuth around. It's like in the game, there is a lot of stealth. And so it's mostly because you have this different variation on the infected called the clickers, which we saw they can't see, but they can hear. And I don't know if this is 100% for sure, but they click potentially because they have echolocation, you know, like some form of bat radar. But it was just kind of cool to finally see that enemy take form in the series, in the live action. And they knew what they were doing, taking their sweet time with that reveal. I was like, let me see the clicker's face, let me see. And they took their sweet time, but I'm glad that they showed it. Eventually, they had some nice build up with that. And actually, there is one more thing I want to talk about regarding the infected, but I will circle back to that in just a little bit. Yeah, so wrapping up my point about being faithful to the game, just kind of hearing again more dialogue, especially like one of the things that stuck out to me was when Ellie says, is it hard knowing they were people once? It's like, that was in the game, you know, just kind of her asking about Joel killing these zombies and wondering, does it affect him at all? And the scene where they are on that rooftop overlooking the city, I saw a side by side of that. It was pretty much word from word. So, and also the kind of traversing the landscape. I talked about that last time, wondering like, okay, is this going to be like Lord of the Rings where there's maybe too much walking and not enough action? Or, you know, it's taking out, it's filler for the series because that's kind of what happens during the game, even though it's more interactive. And they demonstrate that in this episode. I think it was kind of perfect where, you know, they are talking and they're walking, but it's not too overbearing. And I think all of that combined kind of brings me to my final point where I'm like, this show to me is striking the perfect balance of being faithful to the text, adding in things that we remember, things that, you know, lines, complete scenes that we've seen before, now adapted into live action, while also kind of like adding in just enough new material to keep it like, you know, fresh and interesting, and again, still faithful overall to the story that they're trying to tell. So I think this has just been really awesome so far. And speaking of new stuff, one thing that I saw that I questioned because I was like, okay, I know I'm not a 100% expert on this, but I don't remember this happening. When in the series they were going up to the state house just before they get in and they see kind of one of the dead lying there. And Joel, I think, taps his foot. And I believe it's Tess who says something about kind of how all of the infected are basically connected. So if you kind of alert one, you might be alerting the whole neighborhood. And I was like, I really don't recall that being a thing there. So essentially it sounds like they've got this hive mind thing going on. And I know I talk about Stranger Things a lot in this, but it's one of those mechanics that Stranger Things season 4 added kind of like at the very last minute where they were like, oh yeah, everything in the Upside Down is connected. So I don't know how I feel about this being included. The only thing I can think of is that maybe towards the end or like a big kind of battle that they're going to have, it will work out like Stranger Things season 4 where having a hive mind kind of means if you take down like maybe one big person or if you take down one thing, you kind of injure them all. I'm not even sure it works like that though, because they're all connected, but it doesn't seem like they take damage, if like psychic damage basically. I don't know what you would call that. But anyway, yeah, I'm not entirely sure why they added that to the narrative, if not for kind of having that big final battle where when one falls, they all fall. Maybe aside from the point that they did remove spores. Spores were a part of the game where, you know, you have to keep on a gas mask, and if you don't want to breathe it because you can get infected. So that's a level of difficulty that you have to kind of circumnavigate in that game. Whereas if they take that out, they still need to supplement that with something else that's difficult for Joel to navigate. So they're like, hey, maybe he doesn't have to avoid spores, but he does have to avoid the zombie hive mind. So watch out for that. So now as we wrap things up, let's just kind of talk about what comes next. We saw the episode 3 trailer where, okay, Joel and Ellie are tasked with going to Bill and Frank's, and I was like, yeah, I just did not completely forgot about this storyline here. And as I went back, the only thing that I do remember is them going to the school as part of that little story arc there. But yeah, I saw someone tweet, they were like, you know, if you thought this was a lot, get ready for next week because it's going to be an emotional episode. And as far as that arc goes, I don't really think, based on the original, that it was a super emotional story arc. It has its moments, it has potential. So I'm wondering how much are they going to change in episode 3 to really amp it up, or what are they going to add into that story? So, I mean, I'll just leave it there. We'll see what kind of happens. This is kind of like with Mando and with Baby Yoda, where they had their first stop along their path. We get to meet some new friends, go to a new town. It'll be fun. We get to do some exploring, and I'm looking forward to that. Okay, final thoughts before I wrap, because there was some stuff that I didn't really have time to squeeze in. Number 1, that kiss of death with Tess, that was completely new. That was completely creepy. I didn't know what to think of it, but I think I liked it. It's kind of cool. That's not how Tess died the last time. There was no such thing like that in the game. So I think that was a fun addition. As well, just the sets in this series. I was looking for that overgrowth. I was waiting to see what the new world looks like, and I think they just did a phenomenal job. So shout out to the team there. I'm so glad that this was put on by HBO, because they really do give the money, they really do give the budget for these series. I think had it been Netflix or maybe someone else, even Prime, I don't think they would have gotten the attention to detail and the money that they needed to pull this off. So I criticize Warner Media a lot, but when they do it right, they do it right. And then this is more for next week, but I'm excited to see what that interaction will look like between Ellie and Bill. I think it'll be really fun, especially because it's Nick Offerman. I think it's just going to be really, really cool. So I'm looking forward to next week. But overall, guys, I'm going to leave it there. Please leave a comment and let me know what you thought about this episode. I think they're really pulling strong. It looks like there's going to be 9 episodes total, so we still have a lot more to go, a lot more heartbreak and sadness to go, but we are warriors. We can handle it. We can take it. Also, please definitely be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe for more so you know when the next review is out, and check out some of my other videos on the channel in the meantime, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.